We are playing Skyrim again. I know there are so many other games we want to play, new ones, old ones we haven't gotten around to yet, even other old games that we want to replay. Yet, here we are, absolutely sinking hours back into Skyrim. Why are we doing this? Well, in a word, nostalgia. In more words, because we tend to overwhelm ourselves thinking about how to correctly utilize our painfully limited free time. And sometimes it's much easier to neglect being productive to instead turn off the old brain and commit too much time to something we've already experienced. Because it's safe, there's no risk, we know we're going to enjoy it, so we keep going back, even if it's not necessarily important or deep or time well spent. But we want our free time to be well spent. We want to do important and deep things, complete long-term goals, accomplish something more meaningful than achieving video game achievements. So how do we escape this cycle, resist giving into the temptation of nostalgia? Well, I don't really know, but I'm sick of it and I don't want to feel it anymore, so let's try to figure this shit out. Firstly, what is nostalgia? It's a bittersweet longing for things, persons, or situations of the past. We're really just talking about two of those. If our goal is to eliminate feeling nostalgia, then we should analyze what we are longing for in these memories. If we understand why we long for them, then maybe we can understand how to fuck them off. Skyrim released when we were just a budding young teenager in high school, and we actually didn't go to school on that fateful day so that we could play the game all day, which kind of demonstrates the point that at this time we had basically zero responsibilities. Maybe attending classes, finishing homework, trying to get decent grades, showering daily, but as established, we didn't really invest much time or energy into any of these things. It's easy to just assume then that our nostalgia for this time is based on how much simpler life was back then. And we didn't have to worry about working or paying rent and bills, what the future may or may not hold, or what the fuck we're doing with our life, which we still don't know. Not to mention the current state of the world as well. But being nostalgic for when we first played Skyrim isn't really an answer on its own. Yes, we had less responsibilities and anxieties in 2011, but the problem is we don't exclusively get nostalgic for those teen years. This longing happens for far more recent games and eras in our life as well, up to even within the last 6 months or so. And in terms of the things that we worry about every day, not that much has actually changed within the last few years. Maybe then we have to think about what has changed drastically in that time. Thinking of big environmental changes connected to our nostalgia, the most obvious factor is our living situation. We've moved houses a lot in the past few years, and at each house we have clear memories, which translates into clear nostalgia, of the specific games we played at those houses. I can close my eyes and very clearly picture our last house not even a year ago, playing Dark Souls 3 and Dredge and Resident Evil 8 and Lethal Company. At the house before that, Disco Elysium and Valheim and Half-Life Alyx. Before that, Bloodborne and Hollow Knight and Borderlands 3. Before that, God of War and Obra Dinn and Kentucky Route Zero. Before that, Dishonored 2 and The Witness, and I could go on, but I won't. Maybe that's what feeds our nostalgia, playing these games when we were in such different environments. And I can still very clearly remember fighting off the Forsworn in the Reach on my shitty little TV when I lived in a caravan in my grandma's front yard, which, despite how it sounds, is not actually a joke. It was just kind of a weird time. But this too doesn't really solve anything because, well, one, the whole longing for something better doesn't really apply when none of these living situations have been worse than the previous. In fact, this current house is probably our favourite place we've ever lived. And two, we also have nostalgia for games we've played time frames in our life in this house, like playing Sekiro and replaying Red Dead 2 within the last few months. So where's the big drastic change there? Maybe we can understand our nostalgia less through the environment surrounding these games and more the environment within these games themselves. Based on the previously mentioned list, we seem to have an affinity for big games that take a lot of time and attention and focus, or in the case of shorter games, ones that have a really profound effect on us, deliver a really great, engaging experience that feels like it was tailor-made for our tastes. Even if the game isn't particularly good in some ways, as long as we enjoy the experience for its merits, the faults can be overlooked. Skyrim is far from a perfect game, especially now, but even when it came out in 2011. But what it does best is give us the reins and pull us in to explore this huge, varied world at whatever pace we want. It is shallow in some of its systems and designs and quests and writing, but the gameplay loop is just so satisfying. And that's not even mentioning the goddamn atmosphere. I mean, is it any wonder we'd still feel the urge to return to this hundreds of hours and 14 years later? So if our nostalgia is connected exclusively to these kinds of games and experiences, then we shouldn't play them? But we enjoy games, we enjoy good games and having good experiences, and we're not willing, nor should we be, to forego those experiences just so we don't wish we could return to them at some point in the future. Yet, we are sick of feeling this way. Our nostalgia is likely a combination of all of these things. Missing when life and the world was simpler, remembering the big changes to our environment outside the games, and the immersion of the games themselves. But even considering all that, we're still not much closer to a solution. How to stop feeling nostalgic like this. So maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe we shouldn't be thinking about what's happening in these memories, but focusing more on how we think about these memories at all. So let's talk about how this pulsing hunk of flesh up here is constantly working against us. These nostalgic feelings are only surface level memories. It doesn't take much scrutiny to realize that these times in our life weren't actually that much better than now. In some ways, maybe, but there's always negative things happening around the nice memories. When Skyrim came out, when we were in high school and had no responsibility and built the foundation of this nostalgia, well, we also had debilitating social anxiety that made us hate going to school. So much so that most of the time we just kind of didn't, which I guess is probably a bad thing. There are always negatives, always things to complain about at any given point in our life. But when the nostalgia comes up, it seems to ignore those factors and only remember how much fun it was to join the Thieves Guild or the Dark Brotherhood. The truth that our brain likes to gloss over when feeling nostalgia is that things in our life sucked back then just as much as they suck now. So if this isn't actually about returning to a better past, then maybe it's about the future. We've always been kind of terrified of the future, the unlimited potential, good and bad, and the endless, horrific uncertainty. We hate it. So maybe our brain's only solace is to go back and try to relive these memories, these periods that have already happened, because they are certain. We know what we're in for. Also, putting ourselves in the shoes of us back then makes it easier to remember that the future from that perspective, as in now, isn't actually so bad. Does that make any sense? It's not great, but, it could be worse. Even if it was terrible, at least we would know. We wouldn't have to face the unknown, the endless possibilities that terrify us so much in the present. Probably isn't smart or healthy to use nostalgia as a way to avoid confronting the future. It's easy and nice, but it's progress halting. It's stunting personal development in a way that, considering how addicted we already are to procrastination, we don't really need. But maybe a regular amount of escapism is okay, right? Is it so bad to use Skyrim and getting all its achievements as just a little break from having to think about the future? Well, yes and no. I think the ultimate problem with everything we've discussed is that knowing how our dumb brain works, at some point in the future, we will look back on this now with nostalgic longing. You will think back to my time, this very moment in our lives, and you won't remember all the negative things I'm dealing with. You'll just focus on how fun and satisfying it was to play Skyrim again and finally get that sweet, 100% complete achievement. The larger issue here is that there seems to be an inherent dissatisfaction inside us. We think way too much, clearly, about being nostalgic for the past and anxious about the future, so much so that we can never just be content with the present moment. But I want to enjoy this moment the way that you will later long for it. I want to enjoy the present the way you think about your past, the way I think about mine. This is why we don't want to feel nostalgia anymore, because of all the frustrating contradictions that arise when we try to understand this emotion using logic. How are we supposed to just ignore everything else, the past, the future, and just enjoy the present? Well, I guess there is one way. Sometimes it's much easier to neglect everything and instead turn off the old brain and commit too much time to something we've already experienced because it's safe, there's no risk, we know we're going to enjoy it, so we keep going back, even if it's not necessarily important or deep or time well spent. And maybe that's okay. Maybe learning to be okay with that is the point of nostalgia, a reminder to just enjoy what we're doing in the moment. Wait, what? No, that makes no sense. The whole point of all of this was trying to figure out a way to avoid this. Realistically, we need to change the way we think about nostalgia. So our environment, the games we play, stuff happening in our life, all of that is always going to change. But maybe that means we'll just keep having really great experiences. Things sucked back then, just as much as they do now, sure, but also things are good now. There's always things to be happy about, just like there was back then. If the future from back then, which is now, ended up okay, then the future from now will probably end up okay as well. And maybe we can just try to enjoy the present moment, because one day we'll wish that we were in it again. Great, so that's all pretty obvious advice, nothing new, and definitely easier said than done. I don't know, I don't have any real answers or solutions, as you can tell, I'm sure, but I've just been thinking about all of this shit a lot, and honestly it feels better getting it out of here and into whatever this is, and it's also more fun and cheaper than therapy. Anyway, stay tuned for more of this kind of thing, probably, and remember, subscribe, comment on the video, and like it if you did like it. Yeah. Thanks, and goodbye.